And now, Understanding the Times with Jan Markell, the program committed to helping you contend for the faith and view current events through the lens of the Bible. Here's Jan Markell.
Again, thank you for joining me, listening to Understanding the Times. If Olive Tree Ministries is unfamiliar to you, again, we encourage you to visit our website, Olive Tree Views, has some viewpoint, olivetreeviews.org, olivetreeviews.org. We're going to return to my guest, Bill Koenig, who is a White House press corps man, and he heads Koenig's International News. You can find that at watch.org on the web. You can find his book, Eye to Eye, Facing the Consequences of Dividing Israel, on his website. And you can sign up for his e-newsletter, Koenig's Eye View from the White House, which is available for a small fee and is a weekly e-newsletter. I wouldn't be without it personally. I have a couple of issues in front of me. Bill, before we kind of move on out of the borders of the United States, and we perhaps will come back to them, we have not yet talked about the Federal Reserve, and I'm just holding that out for a second so that we are sure that we hit a couple of other points in other parts of the world. We can come back to the Federal Reserve a little bit later. But I don't want this issue I'm going to bring up to get away. I think you feel strongly, as do most Christians feel strongly, that what is happening in America today is probably some very, very severe judgment by God. Would that be true?
That's correct.
It's hardly a surprise.
No, exactly, Jan. I think when you look at, sin has consequences, whether
Yes.
it's immediate, midterm, or long-term. As we talked about in the previous hour, the United States has been blessed for many, many reasons because of our faith, because we have a lot of Christians in our country, the fact we've been a friend of Israel, and we've been blessed for a very, very long period of time. As one of my dear friends says, unfortunately, the world has invaded the church, and today we're not the salt and light that God intends for us to be. And unfortunately, a lot of members of the church do not have a problem voting for someone that's moral agenda is completely contrary and in opposition to the Scriptures. And throughout history, throughout biblical history, throughout recent history, is the leaders are usually a reflection of the nation that elects them. And my concern now is this administration is what are they going to do with Israel? What are they going to do with the abortion agenda? At this point, it looks like they're going to do everything they can to wipe out any restriction to abortion, even fund international abortions, which they've already approved, and also their position on the stem cell, Obama's position on stem cell. And also, as I mentioned, you go to whitehouse.gov, that's the White House website, under the agenda. It's a tab at the top. Look at civil rights, and you will see the LGBT agenda of the Obama administration, which means lesbian, gay, bisexual, and transgender agenda of this administration. And this administration is going to cross the line on three extremely significant areas that throughout recent history and even past history, God responds in a ferocity when these things are touched, or when we have administration that opposes the Scriptures. And I think that's what we're headed towards. All
right. Let's move a little bit out of the U.S., and as I said, we may come back to it because there are other issues, but I want to get to this issue of the fact that American taxpayers now are, as we speak, rebuilding the Hamas killing machine. And it's pretty troubling to see the image of basically these Islamo-fascists in the Middle East literally doing, the Nazi salute, and all sorts of Western leaders bowing down before some of these guys, particularly Hamas, but others as well. And right now, as we speak, America is about to pump in almost about $1 billion into that part of the world to rebuild Hamas. Actually, it's to rebuild the Gaza Strip. And, you and I have no issues whatsoever with some of these civilians over there getting some humanitarian help and perhaps getting some of their homes reconstructed and all. But you and I know, obviously, most of this money doesn't get to them.
No, it doesn't. We've spent $200 million on weapons for Mahmoud Abbas's Fatah, and they got into a civil war with Hamas, and Hamas basically took the weapons from Fatah. So our American taxpayer dollar weapons are in the hands of Hamas. What happened, too, is there were a war between Israel and Hezbollah and a war with Israel and Hamas and the international community, who just recently committed over $4.5 billion to rebuilding Gaza, also provided billions of dollars there in southern Lebanon and southern Beirut to basically rebuild that part of that country. We have spent so much money in the Middle East and in Israel, around Israel, trying to push a deal, a peace deal. Practically and realistically, we know it's ridiculous and it's a waste of money, but biblically, we know these things are going to happen, which will eventually lead to a peace deal prior to Yeshua, Jesus Christ's return to Jerusalem. So from that perspective, we can deal with it. But from a practicality standpoint, it makes no sense. And, we say we don't want to work with Hamas. The international community says that. But we continue to prop them up through aid and funds and trying to make them do peace with Israel when it's just not practical.
Heidi, I think you had an email there from Australia.
Yeah, this is pretty fun. Nicole from Australia is streaming, so that answers that question. She says she usually podcasts, but she's listening at 1 a.m. on Sunday in Australia. And her question for
That's
Bill...
loyalty.
Her question for Bill is, how do you see the relationship between the U.S. and Australia from a political view?
Well, matter of fact, the Prime Minister of Australia is going to be at the White House on Tuesday. President Bush had a really good relationship with Australia. Australia was one of the a couple countries that stood with us with some troops in Iraq. President Bush had a great appreciation for Israel, both the previous Prime Minister and Kevin Rudd. So I think it's always been a special relationship. Hopefully, and it will continue to be one. And I think that Australia has their own challenges dealing with a certain element of radical Islam within Australia. But I think we have a lot of things in common, and I think that relationship will continue to be maintained. We'll know a lot next week after Obama meets with the Prime Minister from Australia.
I think some are concerned, Bill, that it even could have been some radical Muslims in Australia that set some of those devastating fires that wiped out so much of parts of Australia. I don't know that that's been confirmed yet, but that is the concern of some in Australia.
Yes.
Now, Noni Darwish, and you met Noni at Understanding the Times 08. She was one of our speakers, as were you. And she makes an interesting statement here. Of course, Noni was brought up over in the part of the world we're kind of dealing with right now. And Noni says in an article that she's written, probably for Horowitz Front Page Magazine, I'm not sure, I think that's where it is, that international donors have pledged almost $4.5 billion in aid for Gaza earlier this month. And, of course, this is where Noni, she lived in Gaza in the 1950s. Again, America pledging up to $900 million. And, she says for 60 years, and she's so right here, for 60 years Palestinians have been used and abused by Arab regimes and Palestinian terrorists in their fight against Israel. Now it's Hamas, an Islamist terror organization supported by Iran, which is using and abusing Palestinians for this purpose. But I got to throw this in, Bill, because I think people hear the term, Hamas and all of them, Hezbollah, you name it, Islamic Jihad. We had Hamas demonstrating on the steps of the Minnesota State Capitol a couple of months ago. People don't realize, Americans don't realize that they are in America and they're here to cause trouble. They were demonstrating on the steps of the Capitol. This is not just a Middle East problem. This is an American problem.